Hello, in this presentation we will compare QuickBooks Online versus QuickBooks Desktop. Hello, in this presentation we will talk about payroll options within QuickBooks Online. Here we are on the QuickBooks Online dashboard. We will be continuing with the Get Great Guitars. If you're following along with us, that's great. If not, that's okay. We will be discussing payroll. We're going to scroll down over here to the left-hand side and go to the Employees section as we talk about payroll. Payroll is going to be one of those things that there's a lot of different options to, and as a small business or any business, we typically get a lot of offers about different types of payroll, different payroll options from both if we're using QuickBooks, as well as outside people such as ADP or Paychex and other types of people that specialize in companies that specialize within payroll. We're going to talk a little bit about some of these options, but what we really want to do here is just know what these different options are and some of the pros and cons. And it's one of those decisions you want to spend some time with because payroll can be a very time-consuming thing, and it's also one of those things that if we get it wrong, it can cause a lot of problems at the end of the year, and we want to make sure that we're getting all of our withholdings correct and all that correctly done. So there's going to be an option within QuickBooks in order to do that. We'll need the paid option in some way. It's going to be a type of add-on within the program that will allow us different paid options. There's pros and cons to that. Even within the QuickBooks system, there will be some different options we'll take a look at within the QuickBooks system. But one of the pros, of course, is that we have all the information in one system, and therefore it's all tied together. We don't have to enter a journal entry from somebody else into the system or anything like that. The downside is, of course, that we are then handling our own payroll, and we have varying degrees of support in doing that. And the payroll process can get complex, even with a fairly limited amount of employees, depending on the country and the state that we're in. If we're in the U.S., of course, all the U.S. has the same U.S. taxes for payroll taxes, but every state has their own different state taxes. And if we have multi-state or multi-country, then it gets very complex. But even if we're in the same state, it's still a bit complex depending on how many employees we have. So therefore, it's good to get some support on the payroll, possibly pick the more advanced payroll settings if needed. And it's also a good option to note that there are third-party softwares that specialize in payroll that are pretty good at this now. And there's pros and cons there. There's going to be something like Paychex is a third-party not related to QuickBooks. I'm not promoting them or anybody else, but it's one of the third parties, as well as ADP is another third party that would specialize in payroll. Pros and cons there is that they, of course, specialize in payroll and therefore are used to handling the issues that will come up, the different kind of litigation laws that will come out related to payroll. The cons are that we're going to have to integrate whatever they do somehow into our system, because obviously we're actually paying the payroll check and we have to record the withholdings and whatnot into our system somehow in order to report the proper financial statements and taxes at the end of the year. So we still have to, even if we're using a third-party software, which can be very nice because they allow us to print the payroll or do the payroll, process the payroll, get everything set up, it still needs to be integrated into our system, our QuickBooks system in some way, maybe just through a journal entry to do that. So those are some of the pros and cons. These are third-party software. If we go back to QuickBooks, the options for setting up, if we go here and we haven't set up payroll yet, then if we go to the Get Started, it's going to set up payroll. We could try to enter employees without payroll and go through that process, and we'll take a look at adding employees later, but right now, we're going to say Get Started. We're not going to actually purchase any of the payrolls right now. We're just going to take a look at the options. Options can change over time, but we'll look at what we have at this point. We have the automatic tax calculation. If we scroll down, we see some of the options here. We have the monthly fee, and it's going to be a plus $2 per employee, so it will go up by the employees that we will have. The benefit here, of course, is that we have the automatic tax calculation, meaning that when we put the information into the payroll system, it's going to calculate those payroll taxes, those withholdings such as federal income tax, Social Security, and Medicare, and hopefully the state taxes as well, so that we can get those withholding calculations correct. So here's going to be some of the options. You can compare the options to the more full service. Some of the full service options will actually basically do the printing of the checks and give some guarantees. We see the differentiating options going to be down here between these two systems being let us file and pay taxes for you based on paychecks you enter, so we can have more of a full service there with the more expensive option. Get set up with US exports, so it's easy to switch providers. Run your payroll with live help with from US experts, so we'll have some more support. Be protected with your penalty-free guarantee. This could add some value. What we really want to not happen is to not be in a situation where we're not paying an employee's taxes. So as long as we're making sure that we're paying the withholdings that we're taking from the employee's wages and paying those, that's would be possibly worth a guaranteed option. So if we go back up here, we have the unlimited payroll, and we can check off some more of these options. We got the free 24-hour service. We've got the Run Payroll Mobile, and then these items, when we click on these, we'll switch over to I want payroll done for me. Experts handle the setup process. That could be very useful if you haven't gone through the setup process, because that's where usually the problems are, getting the first setup organized. Once the setup is organized, if it's set up in such a way that we know how we're going to run things, running things from that point forward, at least issuing the checks, is fairly more standard. Then of course we have the quarterlies at the end of the month and the yearlies at the end of the year, forms, documentation, 940s and 941s that we will have to process, as well as W-2s and W-3s and whatnot. So we got taxes paid, filed for you, and then we've got the guarantee here, which of course will be part of the more expensive premium platform plan. Hello, in this presentation we're going to set up a QuickBooks system for QuickBooks Pro 2018. If you have been following along with this project, we've been working with Get Great Guitars, then that would be great. If you have not, that is okay. You can see how we're going to set up a QuickBooks payroll system within this project. So far, we've set up a new company. That company being Get Great Guitars would be the name. We're going to be selling guitars and doing some service as well, both having merchandise and a service company. As we move forward, we are now going to add payroll. Main purpose here is not to go through all the payroll systems that QuickBooks has. QuickBooks has a lot of payroll systems, but to see the manual payroll that we will then set up, and then set up some vendors, some actual employees within that manual payroll system to see how it is set up, and then talk a little bit about the different types of options and why you may or may not need different types of options within the payroll system. If you have access to the backup file as we go through this and want to start at the exact point where we left off from the last point, then that backup file then can be restored by going to File and Open or Restore, as we have seen in the past. If you don't have a backup file or you haven't been working along with this, that's okay. We can just look at what we need to do for payroll. Again, idea, setting up a manual payroll. So what we have done, we've got QuickBooks up and running. We didn't set up the payroll yet. And now is the time that we can put that payroll in place. You can put payroll in place whether you used a paid system or basically the manual payroll system that we will be setting up at a later time. So when you install the QuickBooks, you may not feel the pressure. It's going to ask you if you want to have a payroll system put in place when you install. And don't feel that that's the only point in time that you'll ever be able to set up the payroll. You can set it up at a later time. You do want to be careful, however, as to when you set up the payroll. It's nice to set them up at the beginning of the year, or at least the beginning of the quarter, so it lines up to your quarterly and yearly payroll statements. But once you get up and running, if you then at a later time need to set up the payroll and we don't have it within the QuickBooks system, that's okay. We can then go set that up. Now, if you look down here in the home page, and I would open the home, it's probably opened to the home page, but if it did not, you can go to the company and then the home page. Also note that I always have the Open Windows section open over here. That's in the View tab, Open Windows. So if you don't have that open, I would then open that. And then we can toggle through and we can see what is open. The only thing opened at this time is the home page. We're concentrating down here on the employee section, and note that nothing is set up, and you can tell by the fact that we only have the time enter and the turn on payroll. If you click this icon, you're going to get some options for the payroll, and there's going to be different types of paid options for payroll. If you choose basically a cheaper payroll plan, it'll kind of do a lot of the federal withholdings, meaning it'll do Social Security and Medicare and federal income tax withholdings. And if you have more advanced settings, then you can typically have the state will be better and better tracked within the states. The states being more difficult for QuickBooks because, of course, there's more of them. It's not all standardized as Social Security, Medicare, and federal income tax typically are. We're not going to go through those different payroll setup systems now. We can do some more research on setting those up later. What we want to do now is set up the manual payroll system as if we were going to put the checks in there manually and actually calculate the FIT, federal income tax, the Social Security, and the Medicare. Now, I don't recommend actually doing this within a business to set up the manual system and then have to calculate the payroll unless you have help doing that and or a very little few amount of employees. Even if you have a couple employees, then it's probably worthwhile to either pay for the payroll system, and even then, if you have over 5 employees or so, it might be worth your while to outsource the payroll to something like a Paychex or an ADP or a local payroll service, which basically does it for you, and then we can just enter the payroll journal entry. What we want to get from this, however, is what's going on with payroll in terms of what's the process that we have to use to set up, and then what do we need to get from payroll in terms of the employee information, have the setup so that we can add the employees to see what the employee information looks like, and then see the calculations within payroll, and that'll give us a better idea of how we want to set up payroll and what we want to do with payroll. Do we want to pay for it? Do we want to outsource it? Do we want to try to do it manually? Just so you can see some of the paid options, if you click on that item, it'll take you to some of the paid options here. So it's $14 a month, $22 a month, $79 a month. Easy paychecks, just enter hours, automate tax calculations, pay by check or free direct deposit. Then we have the more advanced features here, the electronically file, the W-2, which is nice for the advanced feature, some that are in the higher pay bracket. Include payroll tax forms, that's the 940s and the 941s, I believe. And then we have the $79 a month, which is we file and pay taxes for you, no tax penalties and whatnot. So you can take a look at those. Note that payroll is somewhat complex, so you want to compare these prices if you have a substantial amount of employees to what could be paid for in an outsourcing service such as ADP or Paychex or some other local service such as that. Payroll is becoming very specialized of a thing, and a lot of companies are specializing in it. So in any case, we're going to close this up and we're going to go to the help menu. We're going to manually set this up, and we're going to go to the help and we're going to go to the QuickBooks Help search. That will be the first option, QuickBooks Desktop Help. So we're going to click that. We're going to get the help icon here. We're going to type in here, we're going to type in manual payroll and enter and see what pops up here. We got processing payroll manually. That's what we're looking for without a subscription to QuickBooks Desktop Payroll. So we're trying not to pay for anything. We just want to set up our employees and we want to see everything manually set up. So we're going to say manual system. Once we then have that, we're going to go to manual payroll calculations, this item here. So we want to click on that hyperlink there. And then once we have that, we're looking to, if you are sure you want to manually calculate the payroll icons, click here, and that's what we want. So we want to set up company file to use manual calculations. So we're going to set that up. Once we do that, this bottom portion, the employees portion, should then change, show us some more items, those items including a pay employees icon and a pay liabilities icon. So let's hope that happens as we click on the set my company file up. And we're going to say OK. And there we have it. So I'm going to close this window. And we now have the enter time, but we also have the pay employees, and then we have the pay liabilities. So these are the two items that we're going to need in order to perform the payroll. So now we can enter the employees and we can go through the payroll process. And QuickBooks will still give us the system to pay employees, which is basically just going to say, here's your hourly rate times the number of hours. But but then we're going to have to, of course, add to it and manually calculate the withholdings, which is the difficult part of payroll. Not too bad for the federal withholdings because we have, Social Security and Medicare are pretty straightforward, and then we've got federal income tax, can be a little bit more confusing. But as we get into states, and if we have multiple state issues in particular, then it becomes an issue that we want to probably have some type of paid service at some point fairly quickly within a fairly limited amount of employees.